What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity, interviewing a multitude of leaders across the Web3 industry and traditional industry as well. Today, we have quite the bucket list interview. We've got Chris Giancarlo with us today, former chair of the Cftc, author, lawyer, kind of all over the place here. So this is one of the interviews that Darren and I were talking about this beforehand. It is amazing that we have an opportunity like this. We always like to start these out with a little bit of an intro of our guests. So Chris, if you could maybe just give us a brief intro of yourself as we get this kicked off, that'd be fantastic.
Great. Thanks, Solomon and Darren. It's great to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity to speak to you, speak to your great audience. Look, my professional background is as a lawyer. I practiced law for almost 16 years in New York and London in the 80s and 90s. My practice was really with tech firms, a lot of tech startups that were coming, mostly overseas based, that were coming into the US to access our markets, access our capital markets, and helped a number of companies raise capital here and in some cases go public. In 2000, I teamed up with a client of mine that was building some of the first wide area networks for the trading and execution of complex financial products known as swaps. And we raised private equity in several tranches. And in 2006, we took that firm public, GFI Group, and became one of the best performing financial stocks of the year, and did our secondary offering the following year. By 2008, our firm had about 80% of the credit default swaps market trading on our platforms. Now, we were not a trader. We were the exchange for things that didn't trade on an exchange. But globally, we had rolled the firm out to about 18 cities around the world, operating some of the first digital networks for execution of these transactions. And so when the financial crisis came, we were the exchange. And so we were hearing from the Federal Reserve and Treasury saying, what's going on? And in fact, I received a call a few days before Lehman Brothers fell from the New York Fed, and the conversation went along the lines of, "What do you guys do again?" And I said, "Well, this market trades on our platform, right? That's what we thought. So what are you seeing in the market?" And I said, "Well, Lehman Brothers has been gone for weeks. It's just all over but the announcement." He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, once participants in the market will no longer take them as a trading counterparty, that means the market has already perceived that their credit is worthless, and therefore they're a dead man walking." What was interesting is that the regulators in Washington and New York had no better way of understanding what was happening in the market than to call a shop like mine to try to understand what was going on. But what was even more interesting was, at the time, this is back in 2008, they perceived that a failure of Lehman Brothers would trigger over $400 billion of payouts by the other banks that had signed on to these credit default swap agreements that are sort of like an insurance product. Well, they did that calculation because they basically added up the gross notional amount of contracts that had been written. But something was wrong for me about that calculation, because I knew that all those banks then subsequently reinsured those obligations. And I knew that the net figure must have been much lower than that. But anyway, they used that gross figure to come up with what they called the Tarp Program, in the same way that a fire brigade wets down all the houses surrounding the one that's on fire. The Federal Reserve told every bank in New York and around the world that you're going to have to take Federal Reserve money on your balance sheet to protect you against a run on the bank. And they calculated that amount based upon that gross notional amount figure that I mentioned. Well, anyway, not long after that, I read the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, and I had this Eureka moment where I realized, imagine if all those credit default swaps had actually been recorded on a distributed ledger. The Federal Reserve would have known in real time, not the total gross amount, but the net amount. And it's really the net amount of obligations that were really the issue. Well, jumping ahead to the future, a few years later, I worked with Professor Bruce Tuckman at NYU Business School to do some calculations as to what the net amount was. The net amount of a failure of Lehman Brothers was not 400 billion. That was the gross amount. The net amount was less than 9 billion. if we knew in September of '08 that a failure of Lehman Brothers would have triggered less than $9 billion of payments of the other banks, we could have let Lehman fail. We could have put it up for sale. The Fed could have bailed it out. The policy choices would have been so much greater. And more importantly, the transparency into its actual exposure would not have triggered the market panic that caused the crisis. So imagine if those liabilities had been recorded on a blockchain. And so for me, that was the Eureka moment. Anyway, over the next few years, I was the head of our industry trade association. I became involved, testified in front of Congress, became something of an authority on how the market worked, had a hand in some of the provisions that became Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act, which affected the swaps market. And I guess my work must have taken some notice, because in 2013, the Obama administration reached out and asked me to consider joining the CFTC as a commissioner. And I'm very proud of the fact that as a registered Republican, they asked me to join the commission. I served 2.5 years under Obama. And then when President Trump was elected, he asked me to serve as chairman of the agency. And for the second time, I was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, which is something I'm proud of, but also perhaps confirms that most senators don't know what the CFTC does, or I hadn't pissed off enough of them during my first 2.5 years at the agency. Anyway, I went on to serve as chairman of the agency for 2.5 years. And the very first thing I did in a bipartisan way, working with my Democrat colleague, was to start something called Lab CFTC. And we hired the fabulous Daniel Gorfine as our chief market intelligence officer and chief innovation officer, and the agency's very first, and charged Lab CFTC with understanding everything we can about distributed ledger technology, everything we could about crypto, about Bitcoin. I'll tell you, to the extent to which we were ahead of the curve on this, in the third quarter of 2017, right? What is that now? 7 years ago, the CFTC commission were doing synthetic Bitcoin mining in the chairman's conference room, simply because we wanted to understand mining, and the only way to do it was to actually do it. And that's how determined we were to engage with this new innovation, understand it. And in December of 2017, we greenlighted Bitcoin futures, the world's first fully regulated market for any type of crypto, but more importantly, the first in the United States regulatory engagement at all with this asset class. Today, that market, again, another, 7 years later, 6.5 years later, that market is deep, it's liquid, it's transparent, it's well regulated, and perhaps most importantly, it's proof that US regulators can engage with crypto and can do it successfully if they have the mind to do so. And I think the work we did really shows up the unwillingness in some cases to engage with crypto that we've seen over the last few years. That market is still functioning well today. And on its heels came Ethereum futures, and maybe with a little bit of luck, we might see XRP futures sometime in the future. So important work. Anyway, I left the commission at the end of my 5-year term. I declined an opportunity to take a different role or to stay on, return to the private sector where I've spent most of my career. And since leaving the CFTC, I'm senior counsel at Wilkie Farr & Gallagher and co-head of its digital works practice. I'm in a number of public and private boards, including the Nomura Securities Board, the parent company in Tokyo, which brings me to Japan and the East several times a year, and a number of other boards like Digital Assets and Paxos, and then an advisor to a number of companies as well, and working on my second book. So it's a busy time and a fun time.
Darren, I can maybe go from here, and then if you want to step in, because I think Chris, even in the intro, I mean, you bring up some really interesting points, mentioning Lehman Brothers and the transparency and aspects that blockchain and distributed ledger technology bring to the table here. We were talking right before we kind of went live here with, what these kind of incumbent systems represent, with kind of these layers and layers of technology that have been kind of like band-aided over decades. And, obviously like the provenance of data and like actually being able to track things in real time is huge, but like where do you kind of see some of these systems out there with this fragmentation, with this kind of patchwork of these like band-aids on top of band-aids? Like, where are we kind of at right now with that? And I mean, you mentioned Lehman Brothers, but like, what's kind of your just big picture take on like where there's some easy wins for this industry if we have like the proper regulation like put in place?
Okay, so let's first talk about at least as I conceptualize this technological innovation, and then sort of back into how I think it's going to roll out. At heart, I think this is a fundamentally transformative technology, almost as big as the first wave of the internet, or even as big as something like the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press, that ended the medieval period and brought in the modern period of the world. Why do I say that? Because heretofore, value has been recorded on the ledger of individual institutions, some of which are government run, others are government licensed, and a few cases are completely independent. The whatever I've saved up for retirement is not stacks of $100 bills in some vault that Fidelity keeps up in Boston. It's an IOU from Fidelity. It's a liability on their balance sheet, and nothing more than a liability on their balance sheet. They as an institution have an obligation to me, but nowhere else is that obligation recorded. If Fidelity were to go bust, that liability is extinguished. Now, there may be insurance provided by government, there may be insurance provided by Lloyd's of London, some third party insurance, but that's insurance. That's not the same thing as a liability to me. That liability exists nowhere other than on Fidelity's balance sheet. This technology is transformative because it says that liability now will be recorded on a digital ledger, as opposed to the way we've traditionally done it. Your ownership of your automobile is recorded in a county registry. Your ownership of your home is recorded in a county registry. Your access to it is during business hours, and the extent you can prove it. It's not recorded anything bigger than that. What this technology says is that those things of value, your car, your home, your retirement, is recorded on a digital ledger. So with that in mind, we need to think about the existing system where everything is recorded on these individual, proprietary, in many cases, ledgers, in some case, government guaranteed, government licensed, government run ledgers, like a county registry or a federally regulated bank. So we have this emerging technology before us, but we have an existing system that is fundamentally different. And how do we transition from one to the other? Well, I think the transition probably is going to look a lot like the first wave of the internet. In the first wave of the internet, which was an internet of information as opposed to an information of value, in that transition from an internet of information, we went from reading the newspaper in its paper form and the information was contained on that piece of paper, to now gaining it through an internet source, which is available anytime, any place. I like the morning newspaper. It still arrives on my driveway every year. It used to be that it arrived on every driveway in my town. Now I'm the only probably old geezer in town who still gets it. Now I also get it online, and a lot of days I don't get to read the paper. I'll look at it on my news feed on my way wherever I'm going. But I like both. I would imagine we're going to see something of the same happening as we go forward into the future. We're going to see, well, we're seeing it already. We're seeing stable coins as a medium of transfer of value, gaining acceptance. And yet it's still just a drop in the bucket compared to the more traditional system of moving money. We're seeing Bitcoin as a store of value, and yet it's still a drop in the bucket compared to store of value in the traditional way of keeping it in banks or a small amount in cash. But that's going to change, just as the internet. Here I do have a few figures for you. In 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, there was less than 100 million people using e-commerce. And at the time of the collapse of celebrated e-commerce names like pets.com, Time magazine ran an ad, or ran a front page headline that called it uh, dot bomb. And we're basically saying that's it. People are done with e-commerce. This whole fad is over with. Well, in fact, it wasn't over with. What the problem was that the infrastructure wasn't there. It wasn't that people didn't want to buy pet supplies online. They didn't want to do it using dial-up modems. They didn't want to buy pet supplies having to put their credit card information into some dodgy website. And they didn't want to wait 4 weeks for the pet supplies to arrive. It took the arrival of 3G, 4G, eventually 5G technology. It took the arrival of PayPal and other payment services. It took the arrival of Amazon.com, and it took the arrival of Amazon delivery, same day, next day, 3-day delivery, to make e-commerce a reality. Well, at the time of pets.com collapse, I said there were 300 million people using e-commerce. By the year 2010, that's 10 years later, there were over 2 billion people using e-commerce. And by 2020, the number is close to 6 billion people using e-commerce. It took 20 years, but e-commerce became a reality. I think that pattern is exactly what we're going to see in digital forms of value recording and transfer. The internet generation, which you represent, that is used to trading game tokens anytime, anywhere, in an instant, are not going to be satisfied with taking 5 days to get your money from here to London. This technology is coming. A generational wave is going to bring it. And whether it takes 10 years or 20 years, it's inevitable. The speed, the convenience, the accessibility of recording value on digital networks is inevitable. And we'll talk about regulation in a minute, but the United States can try to resist this, or at least certain government factions can try to resist this, but they're not going to stop it. All they're going to do is, it's sort of like trying to dam a stream. You're just going to direct the water elsewhere as long as you can until it breaks down the dam. This is not going to be stopped, and it's foolish to try to do so. What we tried to do at the CFTC, what we did at the CFTC, was to channel it. And my advice to U.S. regulators is channel it. Don't try to thwart it. You're not going to thwart it. This is coming, and the greatest proof of that is the next generation demands it.
Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you're there with Lehman Brothers and the financial collapse, and I'm just wondering your take on if something is necessary for, is there like a catalyst to usher in this technology? So we're seeing like Social Security numbers got hacked the other day. Microsoft Azure went down. I'm wondering if you see this as a potential blessing in disguise when you see some type of chaos in the financial system.
Yeah, I mean, all these centralized systems, their vulnerabilities, you only have to wait, to next week's newspaper headline to see their vulnerabilities constantly, right? And what will be next? I mean, the fact that we're even still using Social Security numbers for identification in any manner of transactions is ridiculous. But these centralized systems. Now, by the way, every technology brings its own vulnerabilities. Distributed ledgers are going to have their own challenges, which is why, as a national effort, young and old, government and the private sector all need to be working on making this a reality. It's very interesting. I find that 30 years ago, when that first wave of the internet came about, that internet of information, the United States adopted a do no harm approach and embraced it, to the extent that not only did we pass legislation in Congress to make sure that government didn't thwart its development, we actually developed the very global institutions that promoted its usage. The Internet Society, ICANN, and other institutions dominated by an American spirit of free enterprise and free expression and entrepreneurship. We're not doing the same thing this time around. We're treating this technology as if it's something to be, frowned upon. The New York Times has run a few op-eds just in the last few weeks saying crypto's a scam and all this nonsense. which is really dangerous. It shows a fearfulness. It shows, I hate to say it, but an aged mindset that views any change from the past as suspect and dangerous. And we really need to reverse that, because this is where value transfer is going. This is where value storage is going. This is reflective of a digital network mindset that the upcoming generation intuitively understands. And public policy has got to be restructured to engage with this, and engage with this successfully, and build smart regulation around it. It can be done. We did it at the Cftc. It can be done at the SEC if there's a mind to do so, and embrace this and get it right, because it's going to bring its own challenges. And it's every day showing the weaknesses of the existing analog, highly centralized, CrowdStrike vulnerable financial system.
You're muted, Ryan. So I had a question about.
If you need some help with the technology, I'd be happy to.
No, go for it, Darren. I feel like you could continue on to this one, because I'll end up taking over.
I feel like this is necessary to ask. What is your opinion on Judge Torres' ruling with the Ripple case? What are your feelings about that?
So in the spring of 2020, I penned an op-ed in the International Financial Law Review, not an op-ed, an analysis. This is before the SEC litigation against Ripple and XRP. I penned an analysis analyzing XRP using a lot of the criteria that we used at the CFTC when I was chairman, to analyze Bitcoin, to analyze Ethereum, to determine that they were not securities, and bringing that same analysis to bear, looking at the Howey test. Took the view in that article that XRP was not a security subject to SEC jurisdiction and oversight. Now, that was before they commenced their litigation, which came 6 months later. And so then that litigation, which we all followed, it's made its way through the courts, and we had that opinion by Judge Torres. Not long after that opinion, about a year ago, maybe a little less, maybe about 9 months ago, I penned a second a piece in the International Financial Law Review, reviewing her opinion against our writing 4 years before. In fact, her opinion pretty much tracks the logic that we applied, that XRP is not a security. So therefore, I'm not surprised by Judge Torres's ruling. I think it's sound. I think it's going to be upheld. I think the SEC is increasingly demonstrating that they're not going to win this battle, and they may be moving on to easier targets. I'm disappointed that the SEC brought that case. I'm pleased that I think logic prevailed in Judge Torres's ruling, and on and on, on we go.
I'm curious, Chris. I mean, Darren and I deal with, a lot of different kind of ecosystems out there in the blockchain realm. And I think we both kind of have our roots in like the Ripple and XRP space, and like looking into like, I guess this is maybe a twofold question. Like, if you really dig into like how this technology is actually being adopted, like with the incumbents, with the banking system, with everything else, like there's been adoption occurring for years in this space. Yep. It's just kind of under the hood.
Yes.
And I guess the first part of the question that I have is, how close do you think Ripple was to actually disrupting the SWIFT system by the time that lawsuit came down? And maybe that's more of a speculative opinion type question. And the second question is, like, we see mainstream media out there, and it seems to just be like this polarizing approach to informing people about blockchain. It's like, oh, Bitcoin price is up, Bitcoin price is down. But I don't see any like meaningful attempt to try to educate people on what's coming. Do you think that's by intent? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts around, why we see the polarizing aspects?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on others' assessment of skullduggery behind the Ripple lawsuit. There's plenty out there for listeners to pick up on, and I'm not going to add to it. I do think, though, there's a resistance to this technology by incumbents that we didn't see in the first wave of the internet. Kodak could not organize allies in Washington to stop the very digital technology that they invented from putting them out of business. Traditional media couldn't organize Washington to stop the first wave of the internet. And in fact, Washington took the position that they were going to allow this technology to evolve with actual legislation and some executive orders issued by the Clinton administration. And then that, it was very bipartisan. It was the Clinton administration at the executive branch. It was Newt Gingrich's Congress in the legislative branch working together to create that do no harm. And do no harm was directed at government. The government is to do no harm to that first wave of the internet. In this case, the industries that this challenges are all heavily government regulated. The industries of banking, financial services broadly, insurance, land title registries, which are done at the county level in every state in America. When it comes to, let's back up. The first wave of the internet disrupted the delivery of and gathering of information. Information has traditionally, under the US system, First Amendment, but even under our antecedents in the British system, freedom of speech is enjoyed. It's almost been like a government-free zone to a large extent. Right? We don't have a ministry of truth or a ministry of information in Washington, fortunately, and hopefully we don't ever. But when it comes to people and their money, democracies have long presumed and accepted a role for government, right? We don't have one banking regulator in Washington. We've got three: the Fed, the OCC, the Office of Control of the Currency, and the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And in addition to that, we've got 50 state banking regulators. We've got 50 state insurance commissioners. I think we've got 49 state market regulators, securities regulators. So markets for things of value, the storage of things of value have long been regulated. And so, and how is that activity done? Well, as I described earlier, it's done, value is recorded on the balance sheet of a proprietary institution. It should not surprise anybody that those traditional institutions, whether they be banks, financial service companies, or whether they be states with their county registries and the title insurance and everything that's built around it, see this technology as very disruptive, and in some cases may even see it as a threat. Is it any surprise, therefore, that they might work with their Washington representatives to try to thwart or hinder this activity? There are senators that talk about raising anti-crypto armies. That's a campaign appeal for funding of that army. And I'd love to see where that funding comes from, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's largely funded by the financial service industry, traditional financial service. Now, at the same time, the financial service industry, out of one side of its pocketbook, is funding resistance. At the same time, some of our leading financial institutions, some of our largest banks, have hundreds of people working on digital asset transformation. Now, that's probably not schizophrenic activity by those banks. It's actually probably pretty clever. On one hand, let's slow down these new entrants, these technology startups that have really good kit at the through our allies in Washington, while at the same time we build stuff ourselves and try to get ahead of the curve internally. I wouldn't be at all be surprised that that's happening, and I don't consider it evil. I consider it business. I mean, I've been in business long enough, spent most of my career in business. That's how things are done. I think the pro-crypto, the innovators themselves have been pretty clever in their for their organization and formation. And full disclosure, I'm an advisor to the Digital Chamber of Commerce, the Digital Chamber. But their activities on Capitol Hill have been very thoughtful, very far-reaching. They focus on information sharing and educating legislators. So look, both sides are playing for keeps here. Financial services is one of the biggest industries in America. It's an activity that we've traditionally led the globe in. There's a lot of money at stake here, and so I'm not at all surprised to see both TradFi and NewFi fighting it out for influence where influence needs to be shared in Washington and at the state level because of our traditional acceptance of a large role for government in the financial service industry. It's going to resolve itself. If you look at every technological innovation, some of it knocks out incumbents like Kodak, but a lot of times some of the incumbents actually adapt and transition to the new innovation and become a leader in it. And I do think you're going to see some of the old financial system knocked out by this technology. I think you're going to see other parts of it adapt and innovate or acquire, which is probably a phase that's ahead of us. Some of the new entrants are going to succeed. Coinbase, I think, is probably succeeds. But do I think that the CMEs and the ICEs and the NASDAQs of this world are going to get knocked out by this? No, they're going to adapt. They're going to acquire. They're going to move forward as well. So, I think it's going to be a combination of the old and the new.
So David Chum created Project Tourbillon. He worked on Project Tourbillon for the BIS, and basically he proved that you can have digital cash that's private and at the same time follow KYC AML. Now, my question is, a lot of people are promoting the idea of stable coins replacing the digital dollar, just have private sector take over that, but they're going to have to follow the law to a T. And I really think the law needs to be adjusted. And if Congress got a CBDC right where it was like cash, I think that would be the ultimate dollar, but I'm afraid that's not going to happen. What's your opinion on all this?
Well, let's start with AML KYC, anti-money laundering, know your customer, for everybody's level setting. I want to make perfectly clear, I'm not calling for its abolishment, but I want to make perfectly clear that the emperor has no clothes. Everybody that's looked at this knows the truth is AML KYC is a very ineffective system for actually stopping money laundering, for actually stopping criminal activity. Its effective rate is somewhere less than 2%, right? It costs more to operate the AML KYC system globally than it actually does in stopping criminal activity. So it's a terrible system. Why does it even exist? Because it's a vestige of the old account-based system. The account-based system of, as I described earlier, that my money at Fidelity is actually not $100 bills, it's an IOU. That account-based system, in order to function, needs to identify the parties. If I want to move $5,000 out of my Fidelity account to my checking account, there's got to be verification that I am who I say I am, that there's adequate money at Fidelity to honor the liability and to pay out. So there's an identification process built into the account-based system, and all AML KYC is just built on it. Okay, well, if you're gathering information to do the transaction, why don't we use that information you gathered to just check that Giancarlo is not money laundering or evading taxes? And so the AML KYC, in a sense, is built on the fact that the existing system already extracts a lot of personal information in order to operate. Now, the notion of digital networks should require a lot less information and therefore should allow a lot more people to engage in transactions. And so we have this opportunity. I think the opportunity to move to a new digital system is an opportunity to rethink AML KYC its entirety. So I just want to make clear that, I encourage everybody to follow the law as it exists today, and so I'm not disrespecting it, or I'm not calling for avoidance, but it's not a very good system. And I think that global leaders, it's time we say the emperor's got no clothes. We can create a system that allows more people to access the system and does a better job of actually interdicting money transfers. And how do we do that? Well, we actually started doing that at the CFTC. The beauty of digital networks is the ability for law enforcement to be nodes on the network and to observe transactions anonymously or pseudonymously And when you see transaction flow that indicates wrongdoing, and you use big data analysis, you can use artificial intelligence a lot to analyze flows, only then do you interdict the activity. In other words, instead of a system we have today that if I want to do any transaction, including a lawful transaction, I've got to give up my identity in case I'm doing something wrong. That's the system today. We go to a system where I freely engage in commerce, and only if that commerce indicates a probability of something wrong is my identity disclosed. Let me tell you how common that is. That's what we do every day in highway law enforcement. We don't stop you before you get on the highway and say, give us your name, your identity, where you live, in case you speed. You get on the highway freely. And if pattern recognition, i.e. speeding or driving without your headlights on at night or reckless driving, indicates something wrong, then your activity is stopped and then your identity is given. So instead of an identity first system, which we have today, in case you do something wrong, let's actually abide by the Constitution that says you need the government needs probable cause to investigate. Go to a system where if there's probable cause as shown by transaction flows. In other words, instead of taking $5,000 out of my retirement account, putting it in my checking, an otherwise innocuous activity, if I'm actually sending $45,000 payments to some dodgy address in Nigeria, and I don't mean to pick on that country, some country that's known for illicit activity or some activity that indicates something wrong, that's when government should step in. And the beauty of digital networks is that activity can all be viewable with government as a node on blockchain. So the time has really come to rethink AML KYC. Now, you asked about digital currency. In the analog world, we enjoy many means of storing and transferring value. I can store my wealth and whatever little wealth I have in cash. I can store it in a bank's balance sheet. I can store it in gold. I could buy futures on oil. I could buy antique cars or artwork of a store of value. Why would we not? And for payments, I have a wide variety of choice. I can use cash. I can use instant payments like Zelle, Venmo, or I can use credit and credit cards. I can use a check. Remember what those are. Some of your audience may not use. It's a former form of payment used by our ancestors. But we have many means. Why would we not have the same in the future? And I believe that the choice that is often debated, CBDC versus stablecoins, is actually a false choice. I think the future is going to be all of the above. In fact, I know the future is going to be all of the above because we already are. There's already a digital yuan in not only Chinese use, but now increasingly with their client states. We will have a digital euro very shortly. And so Americans are going to be dealing with digital currency, whether or not the United States adopts central bank digital currency. We'll deal with it when we travel to Europe. American multinationals that operate in Europe will be paying taxes in the digital euro, are going to be paying vendors in the digital euro. So digital money is coming. I'm a big fan of stablecoins. I'm on the board of Paxos, which provides the infrastructure for PayPal's digital currency. And I'm a big believer in private sector innovation. I think it's actually very American to have our private sector lead the innovation here. But for the same reason, I think the United States needs to think more in a more sophisticated fashion about how do we modernize the dollar. We need to be asking the question, and only something I formed, the Digital Dollar Project, is really asking the question, and that is, in a coming world of both centralized, i.e. stablecoins and CBDC, and decentralized, i.e. Bitcoin and Ethereum, systems of value, how do we preserve the dollar's role as a reserve currency? And most importantly, how do we protect the values for which the dollar has traditionally stood for: free enterprise, free trade, and free expression? And if we take the wrong view, which is it should be stable coins only, we actually risk a number of, we hazard a number of risks. For one, if there's a major run on dollar-based stablecoins, i.e. there already has been, right? And there will be again, where are holders of those stablecoins to go? In the analog world, when there's a run on the bank, you go to the ATM machine and you do it for two reasons. You do it to take possession of your value, but perhaps even more, you go to convert your value from a bank liability to a sovereign liability, because you're worried that the bank's going to go down, and the last thing to go down in the hierarchy of values is your government, because they have taxing ability, which banks don't have. So you convert from a bank liability to a sovereign. If you've got a run on stable coins, how do you convert from a commercial liability of the stablecoin operator to a sovereign liability? If there's no digital dollar, government issued digital dollar, you will then convert to a digital euro, which will cause de-dollarization. And the first time that happens, the US government is going to turn around and say, we need a digital dollar. Now, in an ideal world, right now, in the analog world, the balance is about 90% of money is bank money and 10% is cash. Maybe in a digital future, the same balance applies. 90% of money is in the is transacted in the form of stable coins, either bank operated or private operated, like firms like PayPal and Circle. But the presence of a sovereign digital money actually is what allows all the rest of it to work. You know, the reason people are willing to put their money in the bank is because there's cash. If there wasn't cash, would they even put their money in the bank? Because what do they do if the bank fails? The system today is 10% cash, 90% bank money, and it works perfectly. The same may apply in the future. Now, those who are concerned that a CBDC will violate your privacy are not wrong. They are entirely right. That is a critical point, a critical concern, and we need to get it right. But they should not for a minute think that stable coins are going to protect their privacy. Not for a minute, right? The data involved is so valuable, right? So this, and by the way, government licensing authorities of stable coins are going to even more easily impose on those stable coins limits and restrictions than they can if the government runs it itself. If you think about it, a government-run CBDC is at least governed by the Fourth Amendment, right to privacy. In the same way that government has leaned on social media companies to say, don't talk about this or don't talk about that, don't talk about, you know, the fact that masks don't work, or don't talk about the fact that you know, where the origins of COVID were. You can imagine government saying to stablecoin operators, hey, we're going to give you your license, but we don't want you funding people buying ammunition. And that's not so far-fetched, because they did it to the banks 10 years ago. Government can say to stablecoin operators, hey, you know what, we're going to let you have your license, but we don't want people giving money to the man with orange hair, or you know, or to somebody who's pro-abortion. I mean, pick your cause, left or right. A right-wing or left-wing government could tell stablecoin operators what to do, what not, and because the government can simply say, hey, they're private companies, you know, they're not subject to the Constitution. So we, you know, the fact that we make a suggestion, that's their defense, by the way, to the pressure they put on social media companies. Hey, they're private companies. We just made suggestions. So, you know, we need to think about this much more deeply, and that's what we do with the Digital Dollar Project. Nobody has been more outspoken on the need for protecting privacy, people's autonomy in digital currency, whether that be private sector operated or government operated. Nobody's been more outspoken than we have at the Digital Dollar Project. But fears of privacy invasion should be the reason why we adopt good policy in this area, not the reason why we say, you know, no to one, yes to the other, assuming that if it's done in the private sector, your privacy is protected, and if it's done by the government, your privacy invaded. No, we should make sure that that Fourth Amendment protection of privacy governs all digital currency transactions, whether it's private sector operated or government operated.
I'm curious, Chris, and you kind of bring this up as you talk about China and obviously kind of their member state partner, you think about like BRICS and those nations and where the level of adoption is. I mean, anybody can go in there and Google search how many patents China has on blockchain technology, and you'll be amazed. I mean, I guess the question that I have here is, in your opinion, kind of what's at risk? Like if the United States doesn't get this right and start moving towards meaningful regulation that supports innovation, that supports builders, that supports, companies trying to, leverage this technology, what's kind of at stake here, at least in your opinion? Where do you kind of see this going?
Yeah, and there is right now, I think, my book, Cryptodad, The Fight for the Future of Money, the reason why I call it The Fight for the Future of Money is because the fight for who's going to set those global standards is being waged right now. China is front and center at every major conclave that's working on the standards of digital money. And I'm not faulting them for this. They should use their economic clout as best they can, and they should use the absence of U.S. leadership as best they can. But they're making sure that the digital networks of value of the future are ones that are safe for government surveillance, that the digital networks of the future are safe for government control. And the United States is not at the table pushing back. And some of this, I think, unfortunate fight over CBDC here in the United States is part of the reason why the United States is not front and center. We should be leading with our values. In the same way that 30 years ago, during the Internet of Information, the United States was front and center, making sure that the Internet of Information was one that closed societies couldn't impose their values on, that the Internet was one that was for freedom of expression, freedom of information sharing. We're not leading with our values. We're leaving the value setting to our economic adversaries like China and our economic competitors like Europe, which are taking an approach that for small transactions, you have a degree of privacy. For large transactions, the government gets to know it all. I'm not sure that accords with our constitutional rights either. The Fourth Amendment right to privacy doesn't say that cops can't come into your house for small amounts, but if there's big amounts of, whatever they're looking for, they can come in. That's not the way it works. You have an absolute right to privacy unless there's probable cause of wrongdoing. We should be at the head of the table as the world's largest economy, as the world's most important economy, fighting for our values. It's interesting. We talk about the value of this innovation, but the real important point is the values. Will we make this innovation reflect our values or allow the values of others to be superimposed on it? Right now, that's the real risk. And my disappointment is on both sides of the aisle for not recognizing the vital importance of the United States leading the values of this new digital system of money. And that's another reason why, look, the right way to do this is a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, right? I love firms like Paxos and Circle, but they're not going to be delegated by the U.S. government to attend meetings of the Bank for International Settlements where these issues are being settled, right? U.S. government officials have to do that. And so there's got to be a partnership between the private and public sector. I'm delighted if most of the technology innovation is done by the private sector. In fact, I'd be scared if any of it was done by the public sector. That's not what government does. It took them so long to build FedNow that it's become Fed yesterday, right? The government can't build this. It needs to be built in the private sector. But the standard setting, the value setting, we need a role for the U.S. government in that as well.
Go ahead, Darren.
So I just wanted to know, you have a book. Can you just kind of give us like a brief summary of what your book's about and where we can find it?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon.com. You can go to my own website, Cryptodad.org. It's an account of my time in Washington. The work we did to greenlight Bitcoin futures, the opposition we faced. Political opposition, the opposition that came from traditional industry. One of the most well-known large brokerage firms took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal addressed to me personally, saying, if you allow Bitcoin futures to go forward, you're basically going to crash the financial system. We face pressure from industry trade groups, largely initiated by some large Wall Street banks that at the time said Bitcoin futures were dangerous, but in fact, what they really were worried about is they just needed more time to get ready. But we went forward anyway, and I'm very proud of the fact that, as I said, 6.5 years later, that market is deep, it's liquid, it's transparent, it's well regulated, it's relatively free of fraud and manipulation, and it's proof that regulators, if they have a little bit of courage, can engage. And so that's really what my book is about, and it's sort of a plea to the next generation of Washington regulators to, not be intimidated by incumbent thinking, an analog mindset of the last century of large, powerful players, but to move forward and engage with this innovation.
You really influenced me. For a while, I was thinking that like these government actors are very surgical in their ways of doing things. And I watched an interview with you, and you're like, that's not the case at all. These people are just reactionary. Everything's reactionary. So, you really changed my opinion on that. And I think a lot of people think, that surgical mindset of really super smart actors that know everything, that are playing chess, and it's really not like that. It's everything's reactionary.
Government is a lot like, high school government. These are not necessarily, the most accomplished people, but they're quick on their feet. They're quick-witted. They put on a good presentation, but in many cases, they're very cautious. I had one huge advantage during my time in Washington, and that is I signed up for a 5-year term, and I made it clear I wasn't going to serve a second one. I didn't want another job in Washington. What that meant is that for my 5 years, I could call it as I see it, because I wasn't worried that I was going to annoy somebody or somebody whose support I needed to get reconfirmed for another job would not support me. The problem in Washington, there's politicians that decry what they call the revolving door of people that, go from government to the private sector. That's not the revolving door. The revolving door is government people that go from one government job to another government job to another government job, that spend 40 years in Washington, never work in the private sector. That's the revolving door. And those are the dangerous. I don't mean to be dangerous is the wrong word, but those are the people that actually take no chances because they're afraid it will prevent them from getting the next government job. And so they take as little chances as possible. They never get ahead of things. They wait to the last minute to make a decision, and they're not getting ahead of this innovation. We need people in Washington that say, I'm going to go and do one job and do it the best I can, and then I'm finishing and I'm leaving. And while I'm there, I'm not going to be afraid to take on some incumbents, because we're America. We need to explore the moon. We need to explore the 7 seas. We need to have leaderships as big as our aspirations.
I want to ask Chris, as we kind of ramp down here, I think we've been kind of talking about this the entire time here, but, I know in your book, you kind of really go over kind of the importance of like free markets and what they represent. Like, what do you feel like the societal impact of this technology is going to be over time? Because I don't think that we've even seen a fraction of what this looks like in the future.
So I kind of, I have my optimistic outlook and I have my pessimistic outlook. And I might begin with the pessimistic outlook just to get it out of the way. The initial promise of the Internet of Information was of individuals being able to freely transmit and share information, share opinions, share viewpoints with people anywhere in the globe, anytime, free of interference. Well, what we've seen is there's actually limitations to that, right? We've seen big tech use their dominant role, and in some cases monopolistic power, to actually limit what we can talk about, what we can discuss online, and a degree of political correctness as to what's available. And so, one can ask the question whether the Internet information has reached its full potential that we hoped for 30 years ago, or whether we've seen some pretty big monopolies move into the space and actually wrest away control from us. I think the answer is still somewhat an open question as to how that works out. And so how do I feel about an internet of value? Well, I think its promise is as big as the Internet of Information was. And I'll just give you one example. We talked before about AML KYC. The existing account-based financial system is all premised on one must have sufficient credentialed identity to utilize the system. And in the United States, that's not a big deal. We've all got driver's license. I mean, I think it's like, only about 4% don't have access to bank accounts. But globally, as much as 1.5 billion people don't have access to the financial system, and the reason is they don't have sufficient credentialed identity. Not the only reason, but a major reason is they don't have sufficient credentialed identity to use it. What's beautiful about this new system is we should need that same degree of credentialed identity to utilize this system. People should be able to much more freely access. And if we're willing to rethink AML KYC, we can allow that access because we don't need to gather that much information for every transaction. As I described before, we can only need to gather information for those transactions that demonstrate some probable cause. And so we can have a much more open system that can allow people in. We can also remove the latency, the exclusivity, and the expense of our existing system. All that information gathering costs money, and it requires systems and people to do it, right? It's a very expensive, it's a very slow system. I've seen statistics or figures that say 1 to 2% of the world's GDP is just used in moving money around the globe on the existing correspondent banking system. We could return that 1 to 2% back to the global economy. We could get back to some steady, sustained economic growth. And look, the biggest problem our modern developed world faces today is the amount of debt that we've laden on our fellow citizens. That's the biggest threat to our way of life right now. The only way out of that debt is growth. We're not going to be able to cut spending enough to cut that. We're going to have to grow out of it. We need to get to sustain 4 to 5% economic growth over a decade or more, and we will actually be able to grow out of that debt load. Well, how do we get that growth? Well, let's start by reclaiming the 1 to 2% of economic growth that goes into the black hole of rent-seeking and latency in our existing financial system. So I think this technology can provide that. So my optimism is that the Internet of Value becomes one that brings more people into financial inclusion, gives them more wherewithal, therefore allows more people to rise out of poverty into the global middle class, that gives the world the type of economic growth that we need to grow out of our debt, and that gives us more individual autonomy over our financial activity. And that's my bright side hope, that in fact, unlike the Internet of Information, where some of our autonomy is stolen by big tech, I'm hoping that in this new future of an Internet of Value, we can regain some of our financial autonomy. We can see sustained economic growth. We can bring more of our fellow citizens into financial inclusion, and hopefully see a brighter future for all of us.
Well, we really appreciate your time today, Chris. And honestly, bucket list type interview for us. I hope that we can do another one in the future. I know. Shout out to Darren for the outreach, and shout out to your team for helping us to put this together. Check out Chris's book, as he mentioned, it's Cryptodad, The Fight for the Future of Money. If you're interested in empowerment and free markets and the future of where this technology might take us, that is certainly a good read. I'm going to pick it up and read it as well, Chris. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Really, pleasure's been mine. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you.
All right, guys, we are going to, as I transition Chris down here, and again, thank you so much to Chris for joining us today. We are going to transition into the next portion here. So give me 1 second here, and we will get started. We have Bjorn, who's head of research at Dfinity. We've got Andre Casterman. So Andre is non-executive director at Trade Tech and an advisor to the XTC network. We've also got Matt Niemerk, who's co-founder of Aleph Zero. Quite the panel here. So let's get everybody up here, and bear with us for a second. I see we have Andre up here. How's it going today, Andre?
Very good. Thank you. Great to join your stage again.
And I see, we actually have
from Asia.
everybody up here. let me hold on 1 second, guys. All right, guys. So we are going to get hopped in here. I kind of want to start this out with maybe just a brief intro of everybody up here. We have 3 really interesting and unique ecosystems that are delving out a lot of utility in the blockchain space. F0, so kind of meaningful privacy type initiatives. We have XDC network. So, everybody's dealing in real world assets as well, but XDC certainly dealing in the real world assets realm. Dfinity and the internet computer. So certainly kind of the underlying infrastructure aspects and a lot of aspects of interoperability as well. But I'm going to do a round robin here. And if everybody can just give a brief intro of themselves, that'd be fantastic. I will start with Andre.
Yes, so I'm an executive in the fintech space since 1991. That's 30 plus years of technology adoption and innovations in transaction banking. This is cross-border payments and trade finance, both on the corporate side and on the banking side. And I've been indeed working with the XDC network since 2020 and with TradeTech since 2018. And both organizations, I'll talk more about what we're doing together.
Awesome, Andre. Thank you so much. Bjorn from Dfinity. And also thank you to Darren for making the intro. I have not had the opportunity to have you on here yet, but would love an intro of yourself.
Okay. So my name is Bjorn Techman. I'm head of research at Dfinity. My background is in cryptography, so I did academic research until like 2016-ish. Then I moved over to IBM Research, where I then transitioned into the blockchain space. And I've been at Dfinity since 2019, so since before the internet computer was launched in 2021. And since a few years, I'm now leading the research team within Dfinity.
Awesome. Thank you, Bjorn. And certainly not a stranger to all the audio podcasts and stuff like that we've done in the past. Matt Niemerg. Matt, if you want to give an intro of yourself, that would be fantastic.
Sure, thanks. So to Bjorn, but not with a direct focus on cryptography. I did more applied algebraic geometry for my PhD work. And then I also actually was at IBM, did a postdoc in high performance computing at one of the national labs in Oak Ridge here in the States. And during that time, I had already started working in the blockchain space since 2014, and then left IBM at the height of the 2017 bull market in November, and to pursue a consulting career. And then fairly quickly afterward, had put together got introduced to the F0 team, and we've been working on this since 2018.
Awesome, guys. Well, I appreciate you guys joining us today. I think to kind of kick off here, and hopefully to open up some dialogue with you guys, I kind of want to get everybody's thoughts on the impact, like the future impact of blockchain technology. I know it's kind of a broad topic here, but maybe your long-term vision of where this space goes, because I think each ecosystem that we have up here is tackling some things in a pretty unique way. But I think sometimes it's nice to kind of step back from, the scramble of every day and kind of think about the impacts just at a larger scale. And I'll open that up to maybe anybody that wants to go first, kind of your future outlook on where this space goes.
Yeah, I'll take a jab at that. I think that what we've seen here in the past has always been the promise of blockchain technology, right? We've been, people have been talking about financial inclusion, about disintermediating the banking system, self-custody of assets. These are, very cypherpunk-like qualities of Bitcoin from the early days. And then even in the 2012, 2013 eras, you'd have people who are trying to do things like library coin, and Odyssey would be the platform that has developed into now, and doing time stamping type solutions on just the blockchain itself directly. So you have already seen some of these basic solutions being implemented at the proof of concept level, but I think what needs to happen is pushing that forward, whether or not that is integrations more with governments to do, say, notary services, or to be able to do apostilles and to sort of automate some of that process. whether or not that's going to be titling of vehicles or deeds of houses, but it's going to require more direct integrations with the state to be able to handle these things. Now, that does come with the caveat of how do you handle private key management and these types of things. And I mean, for public permissionless chains to not have like these private, these government entities not to have, like, say, full role access control over a smart contract to override certain decisions regarding, like, say, ownership of property. These are problematic concerns, especially at the nation state level, or even at your local county level. If you're, that's who in the states, that's who handles, like, say, the deeds and the record of deeds for properties and such. So you still have a lot of work to do as far as those types of integrations. It's not impossible. It's more of a challenge of what are sort of the you got to identify the challenges, and then you got to be able to say, okay, well, what is good enough, right? As opposed to saying, okay, this is an incremental improvement over the existing process. What can we do to make this more open and transparent? So I think there's a lot of opportunity at the government level for improving and having a more efficient system, transparency, as well as far as the use of finances. Then at the corporate level, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more applications that use privacy. And then for the most part, a lot of this is going to be abstracted away. So retail users, people who are just using products on the internet, they don't really notice that they're using secure HTTP. They're not, they don't know anything about all the transport layer stuff that's happening in the background, the secure transport layers. All this stuff has been used with public key management for quite some time, right? So this is not, it's just it's an implementation challenge, and it's an adoption challenge, and it's a way of how do you create that UI UX in such a way where they don't think about it anymore. They don't think about what happens whenever they enter into their credentials to log into their bank account or into their credit card account and connect everything on the back end and make an ACH or a SEPA transfer to pay off their credit card for their monthly payment. I mean, these things are just done. And the people using these products, they don't think about that security. And so I think a lot of it is just more about building out the applications where people are not going to really know that they're utilizing a blockchain.
Yeah. Andre or Bjorn, whichever you guys wants to kind of tackle the long-term vision aspect, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I can go next. So I agree with a lot that Matt was saying, but I want to take a slightly different route in responding. Also, probably because I'm building a computer, which is a very scalable blockchain. By scalable, it's not only like number of transactions of the same type of transactions, but it's like really hosting entire applications, the entire computation that an application does, entirely on chain. And so it's a lot about ownership and transparency, not only for like the financial transactions, which are clearly a main focus of blockchain, especially so far, but taking that further. Like if you think about using Web3 applications today, even in that still very financial space, then a lot of the application is still hosted on like centralized cloud providers, and there's certain token transactions, certain trades that happen on the blockchain. And so what we see as an important step toward the future is bringing more of the entire computation on chain. And that then also brings in, or it comes into entirely different areas of software. If you think like social media, where a lot of power is collected in the hands of certain entities that control the algorithms, and it's all closed source. The user doesn't really have any kind of control or insight of what actually happens behind the scenes. And it's also like in an ownership sense of the entire company that's also very much encoded. That is kind of a more centralized thing. We think that it's very important for various types of applications, including social media, that we get this to a more transparent, more verifiable state, and hosting the entire computation on-chain is kind of the end goal in going there. Everything is verifiable. You can clearly see what type of software is running. So it's a step further than even open source, right? Because it's not only the code, you also know that exact code is actually running, and that exact code is executed, and that exact code is producing the results that you see that are important in various ways. I mean, election season, right? Don't need to say much about it, I guess. So we think that it's very important for the entire software stack to move to this direction, to get these properties that we get from a blockchain infrastructure. But of course, and this may be tying back a bit into what Matt says, in some of these areas, privacy is super important, confidentiality is super important. And so that's also an important area where we see lots of potential improvement, that we can kind of tie together this transparent execution. You know what's happening on your data, but not everyone else sees your data, right? So it needs to have the selective access, depending on who's the owner of the data. Yeah, that's the direction.
Thank you, Bjorn. And then Andre, I mean, I would love your thoughts as well, kind of this outlook. I know that the last time that we spoke, we kind of had a pretty heavy discussion into like regulatory clarity and the things that are kind of necessary there. But I mean, there's some real world adoption going on within the trade finance industry and some of the aspects that you're directly kind of involved in too. But where do you kind of see this future outlook from your standpoint? And then Darren, I'll let you feel free to take the next one.
Yeah, so I would highlight two dimensions which are applicable to the very specific industry I'm active in. So SME lending, trade finance, and cross-border payments. And it's basically the first dimension is more related to financial inclusion, creating new investment products which are accessible to many more people, and lowering the barrier to entry. And this is achieved thanks to the lower cost of operating investment products on the blockchain versus the legacy infrastructure that that is still the dominant one and will continue to be dominant for a certain number of years and will then gradually shift to the new technologies. So it's all about creating new investment products, making some specific asset classes accessible to many more retail investors who are indeed lower value, lower amount investors. And given the lower amounts they can invest individually, today's barriers and entry costs are too high for them to access specific asset classes. That is on the product dimension, and that's what we're doing with Cftc and Trade Tech. We can come back to that later, creating new investment products, and it's indeed also at the same time increasing efficiency, lowering costs, as has been demonstrated by BlackRock, for instance, on their initial blockchain investment products like the treasury bills and others. So that's on the business side, and I agree with Matt that over time the end users will not notice this is running on the blockchain on the business side, because they will just access an investment product and then rely on the specific risk and reward that the investment product is giving them, whether it's running on the blockchain or something else. The technical dimension, the second dimension, is more around indeed the whole transparency. Björn also mentioned this, and Matt. Transparency is key, because actually with social media and the new generation, they are used to this. Whenever you claim something you've read in the press or whatever, you have to send people a link to the news that you have read on the internet. So we are now used to sharing news through the internet, which is a Web 2 technology. We exchange information, but with the blockchain, we are now able to indeed exchange value. And that's why I often refer, when I'm talking to non-techie audiences like bankers, about Web3 becoming an upgrade, offering an upgrade of the internet to with a number of registers of transactions. And whether we're talking about the one chain or the other chain, there are so many, but the common denominator is that they all offer much more transparency. We know what the market cap is of Bitcoin. We don't need to trust any institution to tell us that. We know it because we can check it on the chain immediately. And that will be applicable to many, indeed, use cases in financial services, in investment products. We can see it already from big players, again, like BlackRock and others, because they are starting to use layer one chains like Ethereum and others through Securitize, for instance. And this transparency is what the market is really welcoming. Because this is reducing the dependency on a particular centralized institution and really increasing, and I've put that to bankers as well, increasing the open banking practices from data sharing and APIs to sharing registries and having third parties chains, layer one chains, becoming third party transparency tools, enabling an industry to share common repositories and tracking transactions in detail at granular level. And that's exactly where the layer one blockchains are adding value on top of the current internet. So I'm often, from a tech perspective, positioning the blockchain as an upgrade of the internet. And then people start to understand that how it fits compared to what we have been using the internet for so far.
Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, so I wanted to just briefly talk about everyone has, rerouted their life to blockchain, and it's just very nuanced. Like Love Zero has privacy, ICP has on-chain data, and I don't think the audience really understands that you guys are putting your livelihood in something that you believe, and it's all the same technology. It's just little nuances that specify the blockchain for a specific use case. So I just wanted to ask, what specifically in the blockchain that works for the application. So just like highlight why the blockchain is specific for the use case. Sorry, that's I kind of messed up the question, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that you have to recognize is that in these smart contract languages, whether or not it's EVM or WASM, you have Turing completeness with some small caveat because you don't have infinite gas limits, but you have more or less a Turing complete language in the limit. So what that means from a theoretical perspective is that any platform is capable of doing the same type of computations as any other platform, right? So this is what this computer science stuff tells us. And the idea now is more about, as kind of is what your question is alluding to, what are the specific nuances that you're doing that are more directed and more specific? So in the case of Love Zero, we're working, really primarily on the privacy angle. We have very specific. We have a very optimized implementation of some, say, ZK sockets that allows for sub-second verification time for these for these cryptographic primitives, right? So you can generate the proofs within under a second, which is really amazing and fast. And then you have fairly fast verification time. I mean, this is even on top of the consensus algorithm that we're able to have that has essentially it's the the gold standard whenever it comes to classical distributed networks. So you have a fully asynchronous protocol with constant communication complexity and constant time for latency with respect to transaction verification. So what you have is you have different focuses that people are trying to do, whether or not that's going to be in real world assets, whether or not that's going to be in on-chain computation and transparency of what is actually being computed and how this is being done using maybe say formal verification techniques. All these things are available, but the idea is that you have a general purpose platform, but each product, each blockchain is then looking at carving out a niche in the industry and trying to tackle that, and then obviously work with other people to go ahead and leverage everybody else's unique selling propositions.
Yeah, it's amazing that like just the little things that add to a blockchain, a whole community gets around it and it keeps building. And Bjorn, I just wanted to ask you like just this why ICP is different than other blockchains. If you can just kind of highlight that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's two main things I would highlight, and both in the end root and threshold cryptography, at least for me as a cryptographer. I'm of course excited there. And one is the blockchain is super scalable. So ICP is very, very efficient in terms of sharding. So in terms of how shards of the network communicate, so the network can grow horizontally. So if node providers add more nodes to the internet computer, that means the capacity of the internet computer actually grows. So we can compute more, which is not the case for unsharded blockchains. And then also in what the individual smart contract can compute, yes, it's all Turing complete, and in that sense, in a theoretical sense, equivalent between different blockchains, but the concrete limits are very different. So a concrete transaction in an ICP smart contract, we call them canisters, is just much more powerful in terms of amount of compute, amount of storage that can be accessed, and so forth. So ICP is really, that's kind of the core promise, is you can run your entire application entirely on-chain. And then the second aspect is also rooted in threshold cryptography, is integration with other blockchain networks. So the internet computer implements threshold cryptography for cryptographic schemes that are compatible with other blockchains. And then, for example, your smart contract on the internet computer can just, for example, control Bitcoin, or it can, since a few days, it can inscribe an ordinal on the Bitcoin blockchain if it wants to. It just has control over a cryptographic key that is then maintained by the underlying cryptographic protocol that is the internet computer protocol. It also works for Ethereum, and we're now extending the cryptographic mechanisms to be able to cover also blockchains like Solana that use a completely different scheme for validating the signature, or use a different signature scheme. So these two aspects, like this very powerful computation that enables you to host entire applications on chain, together with the full integration with other blockchains, which enables the smart contracts to be fully interoperable with Bitcoin, EVM chains, and so forth. That's, I think, the main focus areas I would point out for ICP.
Thanks. And Andre, why is XDC like customized for trade finance?
The XDC layer 1 network is EVM compatible, so it can serve any use case. But the go-to-market has really been around transaction banking, and with specific focus on cross-border payments and liquidity pools. So there are a number of partners to the XDC network that have built access to applications that offer access to liquidity pools. Because when we're talking about lending to businesses, banks, of course, are key sources of liquidity for businesses, but more and more, for compliance reasons, they have de-risked. So you have new lenders coming into the market, and we see that on the payment side, we see that on the trade side, new tech providers, not selling tech actually, but selling payment services, lending services, and they want to achieve a level of automation that the banks have never been able to achieve. And this is where the blockchain fits nicely, because with the blockchain, we can automate many more decisions, and you would be amazed at how many manual processes still exist within banks because of the legacy that has been maintained and upgraded gradually in silos, but the complexity of internal systems within banks is huge because indeed of decades of legacy IT infrastructures. Of course, banks continuously upgrade, but still many manual processes continue to exist, even in capital markets for sure. And this is where blockchain is indeed offering specific features like take instant settlement. The value is the payment is executed immediately, whereas on traditional rails like Swift, where I've been active as well years ago, the payments would be processed through a number of intermediary parties and a number of systems at each intermediary party. So and this is where actually transactions are being slowed down and increasing in cost, because the more intermediaries you have in transactions, the higher the cost. So I would say blockchain is being leveraged by those new entrants in financial services on the payment side, on the lending side, and they appreciate the higher level of automation they can achieve, the higher speed of value transfer, thanks to, we know, digital asset technologies, whether it's stable coins or CBDCs or plain coins, non-regulated stable coins, for instance. Those attributes enable them to offer a superior service to their clients compared to what legacy infrastructure has been doing for until now. So we are not at the stage where we are using the blockchain on an industrial basis in financial services. So we don't need really the high volume capabilities that XDC uses or offers today, but it's all about the go-to-market that the XDC team has put in place in 2019, focusing on indeed transaction banking and attracting the right partners and players like TradeTech, Fathom, and others, Securitize, for instance, in the US, to indeed apply the layer one blockchain in those regulated use cases. And there are more use cases that are being implemented on the network, of course, like gaming or metaverses, but because the layer one can achieve any use case that you would expect a layer one to achieve.
I'm kind of curious for you guys up here because we try intentionally to have multiple networks up here together, as you guys can tell. And I think sometimes we get into this kind of question answer type aspect. And I think that's great because I think that it educates people on what everybody's building. I would say what's been interesting to kind of watch from like the bystander standpoint over the past couple of years has been that it's very apparent that there is collaboration going on at this point across different networks. And we didn't see something like this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, even 4 or 3 years ago, like, notably like Alef0 with, you guys launching EVM on mainnet, and Internet Computer, obviously having, chain fusion and interoperability between different networks, and XDC kind of, bridging the gap even with Bitcoin. I mean, a lot of people, maybe some people don't know, but I'm pretty sure that through also Wan Chain and like ISO 20022 compliant payments infrastructure through Impel, like they sent Bitcoin in a compliant way or settled on top of that ISO 20022 infrastructure. So like what I think is interesting is that kind of collaboration aspect. And it's apparent that like when you look at these enterprises and stuff, at some point they are going to kind of leverage different portions of different technologies. Like, I guess where you guys, what I'm kind of asking here is like, where do you guys see those overlaps? Because it seems like it like needs to almost be a perfect fit to make sense to collaborate with different networks, and it needs to be not a lot of overhead for integrations and stuff like that, where it just kind of makes sense. But over time, do you feel like there's going to be kind of this patchwork of interoperability, whether it's from the enterprise or institutional level, or whether it's these blockchain networks working directly with each other? And what is the catalyst for that collaboration? Like, when does it make sense? Where does it make sense? How does it, it's a super broad topic, but Bjorn, I see you unmuted. So if you want to go first with that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I may circle back to what Matt said initially, and Roy also supported, like in the end, the blockchain, the technology will need to become kind of invisible to the end user. And this will never work if we do not have cross-chain interoperability, because then you have a token on one chain and some services on another chain, and like, how do you even go there, right? So we need to have cross-chain interoperability in order to achieve a level of usability that will enable onboarding the majority of potential users on this planet. There's no way around it. And in terms of where is the right type of interoperability, where does it make sense? I think anything, I think you mentioned that as well, anything that is sufficiently different, there it absolutely makes sense. So for us, the first step was integrating with Bitcoin, because I mean, ICP is very strong in compute. Bitcoin has practically no real compute. Bitcoin has a massive amount of value on the chain. And so bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin, bringing potential DeFi to Bitcoin, is something where we saw, okay, this really has the biggest chances of impact. So that's why we started there. But more broadly, I think ICP can benefit almost every chain that builds on EVM, because EVM chains are inherently limited in terms of what you can do in compute, but at least these days, EVM is not a particularly efficient technology. So, for example, on ICP, we have worked a lot into making compute really, really efficient. And so today, we can run AI inference, for example, entirely on-chain as part of a smart contract. And so this will enable, together with EVM chains, to, for example, solve something in a way that is a problem on the EVM chain by using their computer as a way to solve a particular need of that EVM chain, just because their compute and their storage is so much more limited. And I think as like always when we see this kind of these different properties, this is something where likely we will have use cases that will need a bit of both, and we will benefit from getting this interoperability. So I think I'm absolutely convinced that this is where the industry has to move. We have to collaborate, to work together in order to create the value that we need for the adoption in the end.
Matt or Andre, either of you guys, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would compare the situation with what we saw 30 years ago or 25 with the internet, Web 2, where you had TCP/IP and then websites trying to focus on specific use cases, and the more specialized websites and apps on the internet became successful, and then they realized that they had to work together. Like, for instance, you click on an ad, and that ad will be adding something on a counter on a particular website and go in the end to the product that the person is interested in, like Google Ads and these things. So collaboration between various highly specialized websites has been achieved very successfully on Web 2, and I could see the same collaboration happening on the Web 3 on-chain world, where indeed one chain will be specialized in a particular use case, another chain will be specialized and adding value on another use case, and when those two use cases need to be bridged, then collaboration will be achieved and integration will be achieved through various technologies. And we see already quite a number of bridging technologies to deliver that. So in terms of logic, I mean, I'm focusing a lot on collaboration and interoperability on the tech side in trade finance, because it's still a world where indeed you need to be able to exchange original documents like payment obligation, bills of exchange, bills of lading, and we're changing the laws to make it possible, and the law requires interoperability to be achieved by technologies. So it's a very much a legal requirement to achieve interoperability. So I'm all for it, and it will happen because there will be a business need to make it happen.
Matt, I don't know if you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Andre and Bjorn have brought up. I think that it has to happen. I mean, if we're talking about actual adoption, abstracting away this entire interface from, interacting with, let's say, a command line, or even with like a crypto wallet, but instead it's an app that then instead interacts via some RPC endpoint to some underlying chain, and you just don't really know that that's what the app is doing. You're still going to need some level of interoperability. I think that there's actually quite a lot of challenges whenever it comes to financial applications, especially whenever we start talking about the fragmentation of assets. Whenever you're thinking of automated market makers and where's these liquidity pools sitting at, there's, you don't have this automatic composability. I mean, there's too much latency to do a lot of transactions that are going to be done in a seamless fashion. So you're going to have these apps where, for the most part, people aren't going to know that they will have assets on multiple chains, or the app themselves will have their own assets on multiple chains, and then the person who's interacting with the app to do, say, a Uniswap swap between, say, their new favorite meme coin on Solana, and what's going to happen is that they're going to have what you'll have is multiple assets on multiple chains, but then a single UI, some type of singular interface that allows for somebody just to do that type of transaction, but they're not going to know that this is happening in the background, that there's this level of fragmentation. Currently, there's so much fragmentation in the liquidity that it becomes problematic. That's why you have people who can run arbitrage bots. This is why you have all these issues with validators running their own nodes and then doing MEV. They're able to front run transactions. They're able to capture that arbitrage more quickly, and then the retail users are the ones left holding the bag. And this isn't just limited to financial applications. You're talking about any type of application that you're running on chain that needs to interact with another application. So if you think of in a lot of sense, what is the blockchain? The blockchain and sort of the all these smart contract languages and everything. It's just a way of putting, as kind of Bjorn has said, it's a way of putting an entire application, whether or not it's like the equivalent of a Google Docs or Microsoft Word or Google Sheets, on chain. All of the interactions, all the state transitions, all the anytime you change and interact with the computer program, right, that gets updated and recorded on chain. And that's what we mean whenever we're saying that these applications are running entirely on chain. So you have all of the logic for the state transitions. How do you update your basically, what is the computer program and where is it storing its information, and how and what is the actual particular logic that allows for that to occur? All of that is on chain. But now, say you have more than one application that are, one's on Aleph 0, then it has the privacy framework, and another is sitting on XCC, or is on Cosmos, or is on Dfinity and on the internet compute. And now you have to deal with this composability of two smart contracts, which are essentially just two different computer programs. And there's going to be some type of latency. There's this lag between where is this data actually stored. You have all sorts of issues whenever it comes to sharding. I mean, essentially the equivalent of the sharding problem that with data availability, whenever you're dealing with a communication across multiple distributed networks. You have it's just there's a lot of very interesting challenges, but challenges nonetheless to actually overcome these hurdles. And I don't mean just like implementation challenges. I'm talking about actual, real, hard, theoretical, computer science like problems that that people have been looking at and trying to consider how to handle this in these permissionless environments for ages. I mean, what you have is with Bitcoin, with the advent of Bitcoin, you have the first permissionless network, and beforehand you had all this. All the database theory to allow for sharded databases. But this is the first time that we have this sharded database design with permissionless systems, and this is hard. Like, this is very, very, very hard stuff. And I mean, what you have is you have trade-offs. There's always trade-offs in these types of security designs. So whether or not you're going to get full on, good security for everything is, you're not going to have a workable application. So the entire notion of most of these chains are built on the concept of economic security, meaning that the cost of attacking the chain and doing some type of fork to be able to say that you states that are in conflict with one another is very high, right? So the idea is that you need to have some type of threshold as to say, where is this good enough? Where can we say this is a good enough security threshold? Are we really trying to prevent nation state attacks, or are we trying to prevent broader attacks from people with not as much money as, say, the people who have the ability of just printing it out of thin air and just doing whatever they want in order to attack these types of networks? So you have to be thinking about, well, what are the designs that you want here? What are or do you make different trust assumptions that say this particular chain we just trust it because of, say, social consensus? Maybe the idea is that, okay, these are canonical chains that we will trust, that there's enough good actors that are running and operating the validators of these networks, and they're not going to be bad actors, and that's what lets you actually move forward. These are hard problems, and these are not problems that are going to go away. And I think a lot of times we tend to ignore some of these really, really deep security concerns. But I think it's just a question of, well, where are you going to draw the line in the sand whenever it comes to your security assumptions? And I think that's what we have to start thinking about a bit more whenever we talk about the level of collaboration across multiple networks. But I think it's an honest conversation that we need to have as well. We can't just keep glossing it over in this industry.
Well, I think, Darren, I know you're going to go here in a second, but I think what's interesting is, like, I look at all three of your guys' networks, and I'm sure that there's discussions going on with enterprises and institutions and all that other stuff. I mean, I could name off entities, but that really wouldn't serve the question here, I guess. So, like, when it comes to, like, Andre, I mean, you have traditional background, former managing director at Swift, and I know, like, you look at, like, the Swift system, and as far as payments and what kind of global payments looks like, and that incumbent system that's kind of just been there for decades. And it's like, obviously they've tried to use, they're bootstrapping out stuff with Swift GPI and everything else. But what's been the experience like? I guess the real question is, like, has there been a shift in mindset from these enterprises? What are these enterprises and institutions in the banking, wherever it is, what are they looking for to leverage with the technology right now compared to what they were looking for in exploring the technology, 3, 4, 5 years ago? Because I'm sure that there's been a shift, and I would love maybe everybody to maybe tackle that if they can. Where's the real adoption now, and where do you see it going? I guess maybe I'll start with Andre.
Yeah, I mean, selling to banks is probably the most challenging avenue for us on the blockchain side, but still there has been progress, and it is very challenging because the banks just can't do what they want. Even if they are convinced, they need to secure regulatory approval, and we know how much regulators are sometimes indeed making it hard for digital asset technologies to be adopted, in particular in the US. But this is gradually changing. And other geographies like the United Arab Emirates and Europe even the UK are starting to be very involved from the regulatory side to support our industry. Now there is progress, and I don't see it really yet on the payment side, on the even not on the trade side. The most interested segment of the financial industry is capital markets. So, and this is based on proof points, which I published in June on LinkedIn, just to show to my banking audience that some of their colleagues on capital markets, so those that are creating investment products, and this includes, all the big firms that have launched Bitcoin ETFs. Of course, they are not taking a risk on Bitcoin. They are selling Bitcoins as an investment product through those regulated ETFs. But also, if you look at BlackRock, they have started with the Build product, which is completely run on EVM on Ethereum as a first chain on the basis of Securitize. And so BlackRock investing or launching native Web3 investment products, that tells a story. It's a huge organization, and I haven't seen a major payment banks or trade finance bank doing the same bold move. This will happen on the basis of whichever technology, Ripple, XDC, or Stellar, or others. Doesn't matter which one, as long as it's on-chain capabilities brought by major banks. But the major banks on the payments and trade side expect regulatory approval before being able to leverage those technologies. At this stage, most of what we're doing on the trade side is using blockchain to track transactions, to track documents. So it's a non-regulated activity. It's not like clearing payments. So tracking is an operational use case, which, for instance, we're doing with Enigio Trade Trust, and Trade Trust is a partner. Also, Enigio is a partner of XDC network. So progress on the capital market side will be followed by the payments and the trade finance use cases from those large institutions. In the meantime, I think whenever we are innovating, I think the three of us on the panel here are innovating, I think it's less risky and it's faster to approach new entrants in a market. So new entrants in a market, new payment institutions, new lenders to SMEs. And that's what I'm doing, really, with TradeTech and XDC Network, approaching all of those new lenders, small lenders that are tech-enabled, that are open to any type of new way of working, as long as the level of automation is as high as possible. And they are much more open to technologies. They will need to secure sometimes regulatory approval as well, but not in the same way as banks. But they are far more agile and hungry for market share. So they will test and be open to those new technologies and implement those faster than any bank. So new entrants in the market is a great avenue for us to, as part of our go-to-market on any use case, basically.
I've heard this before, and I know Matt or Bjorn, I'm sure you guys want to tackle it, and Darren, I'm sorry to step in here. But we've heard this, Darren, I mean, in a lot of our interviews, and I forget who it was that we were interviewing, but they almost made the correlation between, like, the BlackRocks of the world, the Bank for International Settlements and IMFs and whoever it is of the world, like, they're driving these huge ocean vessels, and for them to pivot, it takes a lot longer for them to pivot, and there's a lot more aspects like compliance and things like that for them to be able to kind of like digitize meaningfully and really leverage the technology. Where if you go to some of these smaller, like Andre was saying, like the SMEs from the financial services industry, like they're almost like driving speedboats, and the speedboats, they have the ability to make turns much more quickly and to adapt the technology or adopt the technology much quicker. Sorry to ramble, but as far as like the enterprise stuff like that, Matt or Bjorn, whoever wants to tackle that too, because I'm sure you guys have really maybe similar stuff kind of going on behind the scenes of what those relationships have looked like.
I mean, certainly it's easier to change something where it's early in the game or it's an upcoming project or so. Besides the financial part that Andrew was really focusing on, there's also other areas where we see now adoption growing. So examples I can give are from the side of credentials. So it's about like having a provable track record of something. And so concrete projects, I mean, we've been working with the United Nations Development Program. So that's about inclusive financing in the end. And here, the part that is supposed to be on chain is more like the tracing of the document side of things. So that's also kind of related to a use case Andrea mentioned about trades. Then we've the Knowledge Foundation is building on the Internet Computer. It's about tracing credentials, like learning credentials for learning people, children, grown-ups as well. And enabling them to use the credentials they earn over the course of their educational career, then in other contexts to be able to show them, maybe get some incentivization for it, or just being able to show them as a valid credential. So I think there are a few, but also here, I mean, it shows a bit the same. It's like new initiatives, new organizations that are just building up, and they are very open to working with like new technology that will enable their task in a better way. That of course much easier than changing course and just such a big ocean vessel that is hard to move in any direction. So it's something that we've experienced as well, where we see a lot of momentum is usually the ones that are tackling a new problem.
Matt, I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, there's been, I can think of, from the LF0 standpoint, had the opportunity to interview a couple of kind of areas in like telecom, especially over the past couple of months, which I feel like is pretty interesting, like STC Bahrain and Deutsche Telekom. And I know Deutsche Telekom, they actually have, integration with a couple of people up here, with MMS blockchain and what those guys are doing to kind of really fast forward digitization. But any thoughts that you have, just Matt, on kind of the incumbent aspects? I'm sure from the privacy angle too, it probably gets pretty interesting in dealing with some of these entities and like actually having some privacy enhancing technology that, just whatever your thoughts may be.
Yeah, so I think Andre is completely correct in the sense for most of these financial institutions in the banking side, it's all driven by the regulatory restrictions as to what you can and can't do. So it is slow going. I think that there are, depending on the application, right, there are ways of, to an extent, getting around some of these regulations where you're not doing, say, actual settlement on chain, but you're doing, say, like for instance, if you want to do the equivalent of an ATS in the States, so an alternative trading system, and you are dealing with these dark pools, where private money markets, or private markets for the most part. So these are securities that are not on the not available to the public, but people can still trade them. But most of these markets are very fragmented. They're very difficult to deal with. And most of the time with, like, say, the Securitize or the I guess the T0s of the world, right? The idea is, they're trying to do the full settlement on chain. They'll be their own a transfer agent, or they'll be the transfer agent for these companies. And there's ways of doing, you can actually do settlement on chain with some of the existing Delaware sort of C Corp and LLC laws, or even with, say, the Wyoming laws, to actually go ahead and actually have either partnership interests or C Corp shares on chain. And then as the company yourself, that you're just saying, this is our actual master book of records with whenever it comes to the shares. And then you can operate as your own transfer agent that approves that settlement. Now, most of the time, most of these companies that are offering these types of services, they're doing trading on chain, but this trading is more like you're only doing settlement once a day, and it's more like this type of asynchronous type solution where, okay, yeah, you don't have full settlement and clearing until, say, at the end of the day, whenever they update their master book of records, which is actually kept off chain in a separate database. So there's ways of doing some of this stuff, like Andre said, it's tracking. It's more of a tracking solution, but it's not quote unquote official clearinghouse type operations. But I think that as far as most of the incumbents are concerned, you definitely have concerns over whether or not you have proper security measures in place, whether or not you have ways of making sure that the data that is being stored on chain is actually private. Obviously, you're using some type of off-chain database, and then you doing some type of like say a hash that says, okay, this hash is representative of this data blob, and then maybe on chain has some role-based access to give who has the authority to access that data, because you already have this sort of internalized PKI, this the public key infrastructure just sort of given to you for anybody who's using a blockchain, right? It's just automatic in some sense, this permissionless PKI. And then you can just store the credentials, either the credentials to access these files in this other server. They're stored on the server as far as who has access, but they're related to, say, your public key or your actual account on, say, an EVM based chain. So you can do all these things, but you need to be able to educate and really work with the with these institutions so that they understand, okay, we're not storing directly the data on chain. We're not doing all these things that are potentially going to compromise your confidential information or proprietary data. It's really actually stored elsewhere. And what we're doing is we're using smart contract technology to go ahead and streamline certain parts of the business operations to be able to utilize this information that exists. So there's there's plenty of applications, whether or not it's in social media. There's so kind of going back to what Andre was saying, and also what Bjorn is saying, is that yes, absolutely, all these newcomers, they don't have these regulations. So you have social media applications that are coming out. We had one that just launched in their beta just recently. We have you have other incumbents whenever it just comes to just say basic games that you want to do on chain. And in a lot of sense, certain applications like entertainment are also a big drivers of technology. This has always been the case historically, right? Entertainment applications have really driven a lot of the technology of even just the internet moving forward. So there's other industries beyond just sort of the traditional world that I think can push us further, and actually get more retail adoption. Now, do you want to go ahead and instead focus on the institutional adoption because, say, that's where the capital is, that's where the deep pockets are, and that's what's going to get you to at least continue to survive, to get this technology to a point where it can be adopted by retail? And I think that's it's just a question of what you're really trying to do. But as far as all these other applications you have, anything that you can do basically with a database and with computation, you can do with a blockchain. So, what are the applications of that? It's all the existing applications that you can do in the real world anyway. And the only real limitations are regulatory. In the end, that's the entirety of the space is limited by what you are or not allowed to do from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, Darren, sorry.
So I have a question, but I know I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So if anyone has to leave, just say where we can find you, and if anyone can stay, I have a question for everybody. Okay,
Go for it, Darren.
So the SEC kind of like softened their stance. Political parties are talking about blockchain, and they're politicizing crypto. And my question is, I often hear different blockchain companies say that they're thriving in the rest of the world, but the U.S. companies aren't really talking to them because of those barriers. And I was wondering if that's true with everybody's ecosystem.
100%.
Okay, great. Andre, does that affect you?
Yeah, I see it. I see much push in the UAE. You know, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the regulators are supporting the technologies massively. The laws have been changed, and the regulators are driving adoption, are pushing for adoption, and the tech companies are following, of course. Europe was also quite supportive, but of course in the European way. That means regulating first, but at least it gives a comfort level in my industry, at least on the regulated side. It gives a comfort level to institutions about what they are allowed to do on and not. We just talked about how important regulations are for financial institutions and banks and non-bank FIs. And on the US side, indeed, I think once those regulatory hurdles are removed, maybe hopefully in the coming months or so, some use cases will be very, very quick on the regulated side. Again, I'm not talking about the other use cases I don't look at, but payments in particular will start to move on chain because of the efficiency of on chain payments versus the at cross-border level mainly versus the current system operated on Swift or other ways like Visa and so on. And whether Swift is using it or Visa is using it, maybe they will, of course, get the push from the market to upgrade their services. So I'm not claiming they are at risk themselves, but the technology will definitely be used by new entrants and existing incumbents once those regulatory hurdles will be removed.
Yeah, Giancarlo was telling me that 2% of global GDP is just the friction in payments, just the friction, the fees, and everything that goes into payment. So, this technology can really push the global economy, and that's something that we need. Just taking out the friction would add 2% GDP to everything. Bjorn, have you had the experience of not many U.S. customers, but more so the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, so we experienced this in various ways. And I would also add on to what Andre said. I mean, you may or may not like the EU regulation in the concrete cases, but at least there's regulation, so there's clarity. And I think there's a major difference with respect to this lack of clarity in the United States. So where we see this is like there's a framework, a launchpad type framework called the Service Never System on ICP, where projects launch their DAOs. And we just see like how those projects operate. I mean, often investors from the US are entirely blocked from participating in the swaps due to regulatory concerns. Or if we see where those DAOs then choose to if those that form a legal entity, like nothing in the US, of course. Right? So we see this in various ways, that just this like the lack of clarity is I think really inhibiting. So even somewhat strict regulation is much better than no regulation and no clarity.
So I kind of want to just add a little bit more to sort of the U.S. sort of perspective here. In the States, the lack of regulation isn't necessarily the issue. It's really more the lawfare that is being used because it's been politicized to go after blockchain companies, whether or not it's through Operation Choke Point 2.0, where you're seeing this continual debanking of crypto companies, or whether or not it's the SEC that is actually going after, and for the most part, I think what we try to think of as honest actors in the space, whether or not it's Binance or Coinbase or Kraken, or Ripple even, right? Like you have one thing to say that, okay, yes, you were selling securities and you were violating the securities laws, but there was no fraud that actually was occurring, versus I actually commend them for what they did. And then one of their last actions that I think they just came out and released last week was they went after a Ponzi scheme. It was like some 600+ million Ponzi scheme that somebody had been perpetrating, right? And so then the idea now is, Well, why can't they actually go after the bad actors? Why do they have to go after the people who are, for the most part, I mean, we think are actually being good for the space and are trying to clean it up? Yes, maybe Binance had some issues early on in 2018, 2019, but they, even starting in 2020, they were really starting to clean up their act, or, prior to the bull run and everything like that. You have Coinbase and Kraken. I mean, they're going after their staking products, they're going after their lending products, they're going after all these different things that, for the most part, it seems like it's fairly arbitrary and capricious behavior. I mean, to quote the judge in the Ripple case. So you have one thing where you have the SEC going after pretty well established companies that are probably maybe violated the securities laws, that they were selling coins to, say, institutional investors in, say, a type of private contract, whether or not it's like a SAFT agreement or whatever you want to call it nowadays. Yeah, that the SAFT itself is a security, and that should have been registered under some Reg D exemption. But does that make the actual underlying token the security? And I think that obviously the answer is no. Or at least in the case of Ripple, there's at least clarity there. But as far as anything else, you have still people are just leaving the US in droves, not because of the lack of regulation, it's because of it's a bad climate. It's a bad business climate. You can't do business here if you are a company in the States working in crypto, right? And that's just the honest truth. You see what's been happening with the Custodia Bank and Caitlin Long out of Wyoming, and what they've been doing with her being denied a master federal account for a 100% reserve bank, right? Like, you have this bank that has all cash on hand and is all collateralized by buying T-bills or short-term treasuries, right? Like, this is, and then they get denied a federal master federal account, while at the same time you have other entities that are also, that are given federal accounts that have way worse business models, or I mean, like, just look at what's being going on in this space. It's absolutely insane. So it's not that there's lack of clarity or regulations in the US are cause issues. It does cause issues whenever it comes to the financial side of things, with securities and stocks and so on and so forth. But for the other applications in the US, we have we go under the common law jurisdiction, which is, if it's not directly prohibited, it's allowed, right? But even if it's allowed, that doesn't mean that you don't have opposition at the banking levels to just get banked and to be able to have a good business climate. So you have all these concerns. You've seen, maybe some of the listeners have seen some of the stuff that's been coming out with the Crypto for Harris. That you have some of these well-known influencers in the space and policymakers, or people who talk to the policymakers and are trying to get a bit more of a clear sense of policy with respect to the Harris administration, to come out and say, hey, look, we're going to completely reverse course on crypto. But then what do? They just do pre-recorded meetings. They don't really do, they didn't really address the problems of the industry. And it's all lip service. It's just 100% lip service. And they're not going to reverse course. You see some of the proposals that are being made as to who they want in these positions of regulatory authority, and it's these people who have been continuously attacking the industry, and then they want to put them in positions of power. They're not going to change their mind. They're not going to change their regulatory stance. So all you're going to see is this continual onslaught of the industry, because of basically just lawfare. I mean, that's just what's happening.
Well, I do see meaningful adoption from you guys, and to be cognizant of everybody's time here. I think that you guys have all, every ecosystem that's up here right now has made strides towards, actual real world adoption. And I guess maybe just a minute from everybody and do a roundtable here, 30, 45 seconds, whatever it may be, like your kind of closing thoughts, forward-looking statements that you guys might have, anything interesting coming up within your ecosystem or what you're excited about for kind of the wider space. And maybe I'll start with Bjorn and go to Andre and then go to Matthew and we'll close it out here.
Yeah, what I'm really excited about right now is in this chain fusion features that we push right now, where ICP interacts with other chains. We're now building out the fundamental infrastructure, and we recently had Schnorr signatures released for Bitcoin. So now you can inscribe ordinals on the Bitcoin blockchain. We're going to have EDDSA signatures, as I mentioned earlier, are used by Solana, for example. So I really see this interoperability theme is something that where I hope we're going to see an explosion very soon, and I'm really, really excited for this to happen and to have a better interaction between the different chains. So that's my exciting lookout.
Awesome, thank you, Bjorn. And Andre?
Yeah, on my side, it's all about bringing a new liquidity pools through XDC network to SMEs via indeed working capital platforms. Working capital platforms are the originators of those transactions. They basically complement the banks, which have de-risked from the SME world. There's a big need for liquidity. There is ample liquidity waiting for assets to fund, and that's really our focus. We, of course, want to work with banks as well, but we know how hard it is for them to make a small move, and also they need to find the motivation to go beyond their traditional ways of working. But the banks will follow gradually. Again, as I said, first on capital markets, then payments and trade finance follow. But today it's all about indeed demonstrating how on-chain liquidity can be brought to those businesses who need liquidity for working capital purposes, and enabling funders like family offices, retail people to indeed allocate their capital to those liquidity pools. And this is happening today.
I've got to get you on for another interview at some point in the future too. I mean, all three of you guys up here, and Matt, I'll go to you in a second. But I mean, we didn't even really get into the trade finance gap, Andre, and what that kind of how that's kind of affected the SMEs globally to really get funding from the banking industry. And I think that there's probably a huge opportunity there, which is, I think, what you kind of alluded to. But Matt, any closing statements you might have, sir? Like I said, I do, I've seen meaningful adoption from everybody up here. You guys are certainly making strides within the LF0 ecosystem too, but I would love your kind of closing thoughts here.
Yeah, I guess the big thing I'm excited about would be the once we have the bridge live from the layer 2, the EVM layer that we just launched, to the Allo0 WASM layer. That would be, like, amazing. That should be out here fairly soon. But once that is enabled, we really can push forward with more broader adoption, and also just being able to have more applications that are EVM based on the Allo0 network. As far as other applications, I think we have a few institutional use cases coming up. They should be announced here towards the end of the month. And they actually going live, or at least the proof of concept going live fairly soon. So there's some things happening in that background with respect to payments, and then also some of the privacy, utilizing the privacy tech stack as well. And then also really looking forward to the collaborations with Kamara and the telecoms on some applications there, to help improve their underlying operational deficiencies.
Awesome. Well, I want to give a shout out to Darren. Darren, thank you for helping us to get Chris Giancarlo on today. That was certainly kind of a bucket list interview. And same thing with Bjorn, helping to get Bjorn. Bjorn is the head of research within Dfinity. Matt Niemerg, co-founder of LF0. Andre Casterman, non-executive director trade tech, and obviously an advisor to the XTC ecosystem as well. All of you gentlemen up here have been killing it with all the amazing innovation and great work in this space, and we certainly look forward to having you guys on again in the future. Hang out with us here for like 1 second as I close this stream down to make sure I get the full uploads, and we will go from there, guys. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.